1, 2, 3.
Hi, Jack Salmon here again for the Comparative Health Systems course. We're going to give an update for the next several weeks. If you got my email and read it, I told you that the 4 papers that you did on looking at structured, advanced health systems, you all seem to have gotten it. You got the ideas down, you're making the connections, and we're going to give you a little bit of a break because of the intensity of the work that you did on the groups with the national health insurance models, and over the next couple of weeks you'll be looking at each of those and reviewing them. So no papers for a while. We'll get that coming in a little bit later. We've looked at advanced societies, or basically those who have structured healthcare systems and have resources. All right, even the Soviet Union, Russia, has resources there, being one of the BRIC economies, but they're not necessarily always utilized well, and that's where you're looking at what is there in terms of the effectiveness of the healthcare system, and what kind of outcomes are there, and how to kind of juggle designing health policy and making a health system work well. And in many cases, as you consider the United States, it's very questionable in terms of the cost of $9,100 per person, with 25% of the people not being served. But you saw the difference between national health insurance and a national health service, or government-owned and operated health system. And you also got the sense of the dynamics between public and private systems. And when you go to the southern hemisphere and looking at the developing world, you're going to see a much greater reliance upon the public sector for what traditionally is our public health terrain of activities, from maternal child health, obviously approaching and dealing with HIV/AIDS, malaria, TB, the other infectious diseases. But you're seeing also inroads of private health insurance that takes care of where you have unionized workforces that have gotten insurance benefits, health benefits, and obviously middle class and upper class people who have a private insurance mechanism, and you'll see this across the entire southern hemisphere. When you think of the developing world, think primarily, though, that 80% of the world's population, the disease burden, is in the developing world. And that has much to do with poverty, and it's very connected to hunger and nutrition. Even where people have food, it's not the proper nutritional base that allows them to have the functioning in work and in family life and community life. So these are concerns that have a lot to do with health status and the social generation of disease, besides clean water and sanitation, decent housing, and the other aspects of that create your health. We start off with, I think next week, looking at the People's Republic of China. And I think I mentioned to you that I had a visit in 1974, right after Nixon and Zhou Enlai signed the Shanghai Communique, and all of a sudden relations between the United States and China ended the long silence of the 1950s Cold War, where China was the red menace if you were anti-communist, or the yellow menace if you wanted to be racist. And basically, growing up, I didn't know very much about China until obviously I was involved with an organization that sponsored me, the U.S.-China People's Friendship Association. But that was a unique group in Philadelphia that had what used to be called the China Hands, people who were very sympathetic to China, either because of having lived there and been there in different capacities. There were two University of Pennsylvania professors who ran the Chinese Studies program and language program at Penn. They were teachers in China in the, I guess the 30s and 40s, a post-war period or something like that. And they were imprisoned as CIA spies, or claimed to be CIA spies, and finally exonerated and left out, came to the United States. They wrote a book about their experience and basically, captured some of the changes that happened with liberation in 1949 in China. Another woman in this group was Ida Han, who was a daughter of a Presbyterian minister in China. And she had written about the village that she grew up in, the life of a woman from pre-liberation days that had all the other oppression of women and the problems of being able to grow up even as a middle-class Chinese person, and then what her life became after the revolution. And again, Ida was just a wonderful human being and very sympathetic to the changes that were taking place. So this group in Philadelphia gave me a very fine orientation, and I was very thankful to have one of my students at Hahnemann Medical College who also became a tour guide on trips to China, because he went on a trip similar to mine and then started heading some of the groups up. And Dick Garfield, the article that I wrote with him, and we had many people in the American Public Health Association. Victor and Ruth Seidel, their famous book, Serve the People, which was published by the Josiah Macy Foundation. They were invited by Mao's government to look at the healthcare system before the Shanghai Communique, and they captured a lot of the changes that had taken place in the phenomenal advancements that the Chinese had, from being the sick man of Europe to basically in Shanghai developing disease patterns very much like we had in the United States, where people were living into their 70s and 80s and they were dying from chronic degenerative diseases. The infectious diseases in the city urban areas had been pretty well contained. The Seidels captured the enthusiasm of the barefoot doctors, basically like our community health center, neighborhood health center, neighborhood health workers in the United States with the OEO program, but that this idea of para-professionals going out and serving people and being able to help with the mass campaigns to eradicate the infectious diseases. And it was a very enthusiastic kind of rendition as medical and public health people throughout the 1970s and into the 80s started to look at complementary and alternative medicine from China, the public health advances, and many of the things that they were doing in acupuncture, analgesia, and anesthesia.
1 minute left.
And okay, so that's China, all right? So we're going to get into looking at China, looking at that public health orientation and the model that has for the third world. Then we're going to move on to the Middle East, and I'm reconstituting the articles there. My Bahrainian physician friend who I met in Berlin wrote a very nice article about their health system. And given what's happened in Bahrain, I'm going to be scratching that because I don't think it's relevant. You may have seen in the New York Times that Bahrainian physicians were arrested if they took care of the Shiite Muslim protesters. So we're going to be putting new readings together on that, and then I'll get you all of the stuff for Latin America and Africa. Thank you. Yeah. Just.